Feeling like a black sheep, living in society where everybody's happy with their spoon-fed false reality.
Well, welcome to the long version with Fletcher Long and Charles Rollo. We have some interesting topics to talk about today. Something that a lot of people have been hanging on for so long is the Mueller Report. And we're going to talk about the Electoral College, which is coming under fire here.
Yeah, and if we could squeeze in a third thing during this hour, Charles, I'd also like to talk about the charges that came out yesterday against two of the country's premier lawyers in Michael Avenatti and Mark Geragos.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, I'm going to have something to contribute to that, having been formerly a pretty preeminent lawyer myself. Actually, they ended up, they're being charged for the exact same offense for which I was convicted in a different, lot different factual underpinning, but same offense.
Okay.
And I want to cover that too. But, you know, the Mueller report was a surprise, I think, to a lot of people, because I'm not accustomed to the federal government investigating something for 2 years and coming back and saying we really don't have anything. And I think it's honest. I think if you're prepared to accept the pronouncement that there's something there, you know, and if you're willing to, you know, everybody in the country was willing, well, not everybody, but a lot of the Democrats were willing to say if it came back that he had colluded with Russia, they were willing to stake their reputations to that finding. I think you have to be prepared, though, Charles, if you're going to stake your reputation to a finding, that you're willing to stake your reputation to a finding that is adverse to what you hoped it would be. Two,
Correct.
You know, the guy can't be full of integrity and then completely wanting of integrity because you don't like the outcome, right? You work the problem to solve for an equation. You may not like what the answer is. The answer may be adverse to what you hoped, but there's nothing wrong with the guy working the problem because he came up with an answer you weren't expecting.
I think there was a lot of people crying in their beer when this report came out.
I'm going to be honest with you, Charles. I don't think that President Trump expected the report to read as it did, or else I don't know that he would have been dogging him for 2 solid years over
Yeah.
it. I think he was equally surprised and probably relieved because Trump knows, I know, you know, maybe some people out there don't know, that the federal government can merely decide to target you and can probably get you convicted of anything they want if you're in their way. I mean, that's not – is that a altogether foreign proposition to you, Charles? I mean,
No, not at all.
So, I mean, that's one issue there is that if you don't have a lot of faith in federal investigations, and the reason that I don't, by the way, but the reason that I don't is because it was my experience as a former criminal trial attorney that too many times the entity conducting the investigation had already worked the problem and already had a solution. You know, well, they hadn't worked the problem, but they had a solution before beginning to work the problem. And that the only thing that they wanted to regard were those things which buttressed the solution that they had already predetermined, right? Starting off a math problem with the answer and then working it backwards to ensure that the answer that you had from the very beginning is right, as opposed to learning what the answer to the problem may be.
Yes, I've seen that many times myself in corporate America, and I think that we have come to a place here where now we have the report, and the response to the Trump detractors are, let's see the entire report, hoping that they will find some bit of evidence that they can hang their hats on.
I'm sorry, Charles.
No, you're fine.
Go ahead and finish that last statement. I'm
So
sorry.
Then the end question to me always becomes, well, if we can't trust this guy who did the investigating, is there anyone we can trust to do it?
Well, I think the answer is you have to accept the outcome of the investigation. I think that's the answer. I don't think, first of all, and it's one of our biggest fallacies as human beings, is we have to get over ourselves. We have to get over the perception that we know absolutely everything before the investigation was even conducted. There were so many people out there that were so sure that Trump had colluded with a foreign power and been compromised by a foreign power to hand over to him the election. One thing, I don't know if this has occurred to you, but, James Comey releasing what he did about the emails vis-a-vis the investigation of Hillary Clinton at the time that he did probably won Trump the election in 2016. And now Mueller releasing that there's no collusion after a 2-year thorough, I'm sure he would claim, investigation into the matter, may win Trump the 2020 election. So you have to ask yourself this question, and I posit this partly as a joke, but how big a Trump fans are the FBI? Because I'm going to tell you, for 2 years, Trump has been telling us that it's the deep state and they're dead set against him. They may be the biggest Trump fans. Everything they do appears to always work out to his his betterment.
Well, I'll quote something from one of my favorite movies. It's sort of a paraphrase, but The Conspiracy Theory with Mel Gibson. And he says, it's all one government, but at some levels they're working together and other levels they're working against each other. And so it's a complex entity. It really is.
Well, I'll quote to you one of my favorite quotes about paranoia. And I don't know who it was. It might have been Molly Ivins, who was the famous journalist for the Dallas Morning Star for years and years. But somebody once said that just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you.
Yes, I heard that one. I love that. Yeah.
So, I mean, the Mueller report comes in. And according to the Mueller report, he did not collude, or they did not feel like the evidence was sufficient to prove an allegation that he colluded with a foreign power to meddle in the election. And the other finding is that he may or may not have obstructed justice. But we're going to defer this to the Attorney General to determine whether this should be prosecuted or not. And the Attorney General said, well, it won't be. And that's where we are. I mean, that's the Mueller report, as far as I know.
Do you think that they will release the entire report?
No, I don't.
Okay.
It took us 50 years to see the Warren Commission's report on the Kennedy assassination.
Right.
I think they will claim. Here's what I think. I think Congress has to have it. Whether they show it to the American people or, even if it's given to them under the strictest of seals, even if they're told you aren't to release this to anyone on penalty of prosecution or whatever they have to say. But I think the United States Congress should see it. I think that more than one person needs to see it. And that's not coming from someone who's disappointed with its contents. I'm not saying that because I'm disappointed with its contents. I'm saying that more than just Barr and Rosenstein need to see it.
Do you think that without that Congress looking at this document or this report, that it'll never be put to bed?
Yes. I mean, you're going to have exactly what you had in the Warren Commission, different theories about who the shooter was up on the knoll and all of those things, whether there was a single shooter or whether there were multiple shooters. I think that it's kind of curious to me because this situation's been so likened to Watergate. And, of course, the issues were dead on. The Watergate issue was Nixon's rather curious belief that may have been, but he believed that the Soviet Union, wasn't Russia back then, but the Soviet Union was trying to take the United States of America in a bloodless coup d'etat from within by, financing the Democratic Convention, National Convention, and financing the Democratic platform. That's almost letter perfect, the exact scenario that they were studying in the Mueller investigation. Robert Mueller, Trump called he and his team angry Democrats. The truth of the matter is Robert Mueller is a career, lifelong member of the grand old party. Rosenstein is too, so is Barr. Whitaker You know, all the hierarchy in the Justice Department, I don't know of any, I could be wrong, but I don't know of any that don't tend to be politically conservative and tend to espouse to a conservative platform.
I look at that, and people use that particular avenue to discredit those people. But does your political affiliation automatically discredit you from making a just investigation?
Look, I had every confidence that this was going to be a legitimate investigation, that it was going to be thoroughly conducted, and that whatever the answer that came out of this investigation was going to be likely the answer, and I was going to live with it regardless of what the answer happened to be. If they'd have come up with the fact that we had been compromised and that there was collusion to interfere in the election process, I was going to conduct myself accordingly. They came up with the response that there wasn't any collusion, and that if there was obstruction of justice, it didn't rise to the level that would support the bringing of an indictment. Of course, that may be because the president cannot be indicted according to Justice Department policy.
But his staff,
he can be impeached. He can be impeached. And his staff surrounding him could be indicted. Sure. So, I mean, the bottom line is that nothing. Just because the Mueller report came out with the least sexy of the outcomes. If you're a news junkie and it comes out that he's a foreign agent of the Russian government, I mean, that's James Bondish. But just because it came out with the least sexy of the likely outcomes doesn't mean it wasn't the accurate outcome. It doesn't mean that he conducted the investigation poorly. It doesn't mean that he's all of a sudden a Republican pundit where he's been an angry Democrat for 2 years. It doesn't mean any of those things.
Right.
And, I think a lot of people should see the Mueller report in government at least. I think a lot of people should see the report, and that they should have an opportunity to make up their mind based on how they interpret the report versus how it was interpreted for them.
Do you think the pendulum will swing the other way, and that there'll be investigations of the other party?
I don't know. I really can't tell you that, Charles. I don't know that at this point conducting an investigation. I know that that's what people on the right want to see happen, because it seems like vindication. It seems like justice to some. It seems like it's a meet outcome for what they deem to have been the peril through which Trump has been made to travel. But I mean, I don't know that the government should be in the revenge business. I don't know what, if anything, Obama or Clinton had to do with this particular investigation. I mean, I understand that the that the investigation was launched when Obama was in his final days as president of the United States, but he was a lame duck, Charles. I mean, he was leaving office, and if Trump hadn't have fired James Comey, there wouldn't have been the appointment of a special counsel at all. I kind of am glad, though, Charles, the country has been through this process. I'm glad a special counsel was appointed. I'm glad that he thoroughly investigated it, and I'm glad that he came out with the result that he did. Because in my mind, it puts to bed the question as to whether or not Trump is a foreign agent.
Right.
And I think that's something we needed to know.
Well, I'll tell you some of the things that I've seen on the internet, what people are saying, and one of them was, well, he's not exonerated, but he's not convicted, he's not charged, but he's not exonerated. And it's like, well, yeah, well, there's insufficient evidence. I was saying, how far do you have to go to get to the point where you say, okay, it didn't happen?
Well, first of all, Charles, some people don't understand our justice system anyway. There are 3 pleas to a criminal charge. One of them is guilty. The other is not guilty. It's not innocent. There is no plea of innocent. Guilty, I'm not guilty, or I do not contest the charges. That's called nolo contendere.
Right.
So, he wasn't exonerated from questions of obstruction of justice. I feel he was exonerated from Russian collusion. I would disagree with anyone saying that he was not exonerated about Russian collusion, because I feel that he was. I feel he was completely exonerated from Russian collusion. Unless I misunderstood, and again, I'm getting this secondhand, third hand, just like all the people out there that are commenting over the internet. But unless I misunderstood, the only thing that was being investigated about which he did not receive complete absolution, not absolution, because that implies he did it and is being forgiven.
Right.
The only thing that he was for which he was investigated, which he wasn't completely exonerated, was the obstruction of justice portion. Is my understanding. Is that yours?
Yeah, and in that area, it's sort of it can be very gray area. I mean, it's a public comment about would that be obstruction? I mean, where do we look for obstruction?
My understanding is that the obstruction of justice. Are you there?
And see if we can.
Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, but I'm just my screen's froze. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to restart the meeting. Just hang tight. Yeah, it's telling me it's not responding.
Okay.
I'm going to close it and reopen it. I'll send you a new link. Okay?
You're working now. You see it now?
Let's see.
All right. Okay. So what were we saying when we went into freeze?
We're talking about the obstruction of justice and what really constitutes an obstruction of justice.
Well, here's what I understand the underpinnings of that particular charge were, that when he fired James Comey for the stated reason of the way in which the Russian investigation was being handled, that was the offense, and that he had made several tweets that they were looking at meant to silence potential witnesses in that case, and that also would constitute potentially the offense of obstruction of justice. That is my understanding. I think that his lawyers in the White House counsel's office told him that he couldn't fire the special counsel because that would absolutely be obstruction of justice. You will remember that Nixon fired his investigator, and that didn't work out very well. And I think that's why he never fired Mueller. And I think Mueller has shown that he was not bent on. He was really working the problem toward a solution that he had not already arrived. Is what I think Mueller has shown. In my estimation, I think he's shown that he was working a problem toward a solution, not working backward from a solution.
That's my impression as well. Let's go on to our second topic, which is the Electoral College. Now, there's been some talk now by the Democratic Party to change the Electoral College. And I'm not sure if they're proposing a direct vote or not, but they're indicating that maybe it should be abolished.
Well, the thing about the Electoral College is the Electoral College was fashioned because people did not believe that we were well and sufficiently lettered as a population to have a true democracy as opposed to a representative republic. And I think that may be even more true today than it's ever been. That was the reason for it. When they convened for the Constitutional Convention in 1787, there were several methods of electing a president that was discussed. One of them was just pure outright selection by Congress. There was a method where they would select them by the governors of each state would vote. State legislatures were going to select them. Special group or members of Congress chosen by lot, casting lots, or by a direct popular election. It was referred to a committee of 11 on postponed matters at the end of that particular convention. And they devised the Electoral College system in its original form. So we've always had it since the very dawn of the country, since we became a constitutional form of government. It was met with, the delegates approved of it, very widespread approval. and was put into the final document of the Constitution with only minor changes, and was supposed to, really, to be honest, Charles, if we're being perfectly honest, the point of the Electoral College was really to not have the slaves count, because there were places in the South where there were more slaves than free men, and a purely popular vote could have made it very difficult on white people to get elected in some places.
Interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that angle to it.
That's really what people can say what they want, but that's really what it was. They said that the real reason was they wanted to give the less populous states some leverage in the process. That's the same reason they have 2 senators for each state, regardless of population, is that they didn't want to make, here's my problem with doing away with the Electoral College. If you do away with the Electoral College and have a purely plurality vote, right? Mm-hmm. I think that you're doing a disservice to Kentuckians, where I am, right? Because not a lot of people live in Kentucky. We're one of the least populated states like Mississippi that are very poorly populated. Their vote won't really count, because there's no reason to really campaign in rurally populated states, because, you can just sweep California and you're basically elected, right? There's like 14 states now, Charles, that if you win those 14 states, you can lose every other state and still get elected, because you'll have enough Electoral College votes, right? You'll
and
have
then
270 votes.
The states they call the flyover states, the ones that just basically don't get visited because there's just not enough electoral votes there to matter.
Well, and of course, there'd be a lot more flyover states if we were using a system where it was just a popular vote. So this is a difficult decision. I can't pretend that I know the answer to this. I know that the Electoral College has been around since the formation of the country. Is it still practical in today's day and time as it was then? We know that at least one of the reasons for the Electoral College was to keep the slaves from binding together and voting themselves out of indenture, or voting themselves into power. That was an issue. So we know that was at least one of the reasons. That clearly doesn't resonate any longer. You've got people concerned about the influx of voters, people that come into the country illegally and gain the ability to vote. And some states, they want to give them the ability to vote like almost immediately. So that's an issue.
And what I would suggest is that, yes, maybe the system needs some tweaking, as opposed to abolishment. Maybe, what's the better plan? If you're going to do away with one plan, you need to have a better one to replace it. And so I'm waiting on those to see. I don't think direct vote is the way. I just don't think that is going to be the answer to that problem.
There was an article that was written in Time magazine. It was entitled "The Troubling Reason the Electoral College Exists." Okay, and I'll just read from it briefly. As Americans await the quadrennial running of the presidential obstacle course now known as the Electoral College, it's worth remembering why we have this odd political contraption in the first place. After all, state governors in all 50 states are elected by popular vote. Why not do the same for the governor of all the states, aka the president? The quirks of the system were exposed when Donald Trump secured the presidency with an Electoral College majority, even though Hillary Clinton had a narrow lead in the popular vote. Some claim that the founding fathers chose the college over direct election in order to balance the interest of high population and low population states. But the deepest political divisions in America have always run not between big and small states, but between the North and the South, and between the coast and the interior. in 1780s, life was far more local, but the early emergence of national presidential parties rendered the objection obsolete by linking presidential candidates to slates of local candidates and national platforms, which explained to voters who stood for what. The long and short of it, and I don't want to read the whole thing, but the long and short of it is, this is an article that talks about the system's pro-slavery tilt, even though it wasn't overwhelmingly obvious when the Constitution was ratified. It quickly became so. For 32 of the Constitution's first 36 years, a white slave-holding Virginian occupied the presidency. You see the connection?
Mm-hmm.
Southerner Thomas Jefferson, for example, won the election of 1800 against John Adams, who was a Northerner, in a race where the slavery skew of the Electoral College was the decisive margin of victory. Without the extra Electoral College votes generated by slavery, the mostly Southern states that supported Jefferson would not have sufficed to give him a majority. So you see the slavery connection now.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is why it's going to be a sexy argument to do away with the Electoral College, is because of its roots in slavery.
Yeah, it's there has to be some kind of hook that people use to support their positions.
I think you'll hear that more and more going forward, Charles.
Yeah.
That's what you're going to hear, is this was a slave master's rigged system so Southern states could gain representation, federal representation, even though they had fewer people than the northern, more populated, industrialized states. When industrialization became in vogue, I'm not saying that the 1780s was a very industrialized nation, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's go on to the third subject here. You had some things you wanted to talk to about the prosecution of attorneys. And,
well, I do, and this is going to sound self-serving. I don't mean it to be. In this country, we have for a very long time targeted, particularly attorneys that are good. Clarence Darrow was indicted 3 times. On his 3rd indictment in California, he was banished from the state of California. They used to have that as a punishment, Charles, banishment. He came to Tennessee and tried the Scopes Monkey trial, probably the most famous trial ever tried, particularly in Tennessee, but maybe in the country. F. Lee Bailey has been disbarred in 2 states, denied admission in a 3rd, and lives over a beauty parlor in South Carolina today, close to death. Probably our country's greatest trial lawyer in its history. Lawyers, particularly lawyers that are good lawyers, if they don't die young like Johnny Cochran, come to rather ignominious ends, if you will, all too often that being the case. And another 2 lawyers, 2 of the country's finest trial attorneys, in Michael Avenatti, although it might be unfair to term him one of the country's finest trial attorneys, I don't know that to be the case. I know this. He started turning up in high-profile cases, particularly when he took over the Stormy Daniels matter. So he's been the hot attorney du jour nationally. But Mark Garagos is clearly one of the country's finest trial attorneys, CNN contributor until yesterday. And they've now been charged with extortion. Now, my understanding of the extortion racket, if you will, is that, and I'm gonna lay it out like I understand it to be, Charles, and I could be wrong. But apparently Avenatti had a client who had some sort of a grievance with the Nike Corporation. And I don't know whether you've been following the federal investigation into Adidas and Adidas executives and its far-reaching implications into college athletics, particularly basketball, although I'm not going to say that it's limited to just basketball, of players being paid and placed at schools that are potential lottery pick basketball players. Right, Charles? You're familiar with this.
Yes.
Been allegations for years and years about football players being paid. I've heard it referred to as the faucet. If you're going to have a football program, somebody's got to turn on the faucet. I've heard that referenced before. I've known people through the years that were bag men, or described bag men as people that delivered the bags of cash to prospects to play at this school or the other, or claimed that they were bag men. I don't know what they were. So anyway, the allegations are that Avenatti contacts Nike and says, let me tell you what you're going to do. You're going to pay Garagos and me somewhere between $15 and $25 million to conduct an internal audit into your conduct vis-a-vis lottery pick prospects, vis-a-vis where they're being placed to play college, and vis-a-vis they're ultimately signing to endorse and brand products through the Nike Corporation. And if you don't want to do that, if you don't want to hire us, retain us, Charles, we're going to have a press conference this afternoon, right as you're about to announce your quarterly earnings, and we're just going to blow the top off your market cap by telling them how, implicatable and how dirty your hands are in the present ongoing college athletic scandal. Now, if that is what happened, that is what has been portrayed as to have happened. Apparently, the Nike Corporation contacted the federal authorities and said, listen, man, this Avenatti cat's telling us he's going to do this, this, and this. And so the FBI wired them up, and there's supposed to be some wired conversations. If that is what happened, Charles, that is garden variety extortion. That's what that is, especially if what they're saying is untrue. And I don't know if the underpinning truth of the matter. Now, if you call up Nike and say, look, my client has been damaged, and, you need to settle this case with my client and pay them the money that they're entitled to, and we believe that to be $25 million, and if you don't do that, then maybe I'll go public with the fact that you guys are out here buying players and placing them at institutions just like Adidas. If that's really what they're doing, isn't that what you would want your lawyer what are you hiring him to do, Charles? If you're hiring him to sue Nike, what do you want him? What do you expect of him? To press every advantage for you within the bounds of the law. I don't think it's illegal to say that Nike is doing some things if they are doing them. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
I don't think it's illegal to use that information that you've obtained in order to get them to settle a case with your client if your client is owed that money, right? If there's a legitimate argument can be made that the Nike Corporation's actions have led to your client being so sufficiently damaged. And for people that don't know, I was convicted of extortion and lost my legal career, but my allegations were completely different. It centered around a woman who had hired our firm for services that she enjoyed and used, and for which she didn't pay. And so the senior partner said, if you don't pay us, we're going to go down and have you arrested for theft of services. And the government opined that threatening her with having her arrested for theft of services was an offense. That if we had just gone and taken out a warrant, we wouldn't have committed a crime at all. So, what I would, it's the same offense. It's extortion. I'm not trying to, I was convicted of it, Charles. I'm a convicted felon. So I'm not trying to say that I didn't do anything. I'm just saying that the allegations are vastly different from what I'm hearing that Avenatti and potentially Garagos may have done, right?
Right.
But I'm just saying that there could be, I can conceive of a way that what they're accused of doing, depending on whether or not the press has taken liberty with their actions, but I can conceive of a way that what they were doing was actually pretty damn good law practice.
So, yeah, and it's not that they manufactured the situation. If in fact Nike was doing those things and they're proven to have done them, then that really sheds a different light on the situation.
Well, obviously, since I'm a convicted extortioner, I don't know the law of extortion that well, but I would think it does. I would think if Nike's really engaged in the practices, I mean, if Michael Avenatti finds out that they're doing something and he goes to the press and discloses it like he did R. Kelly, that's not an offense. I mean, he's got a First Amendment right to have a press conference and say anything he wants to say, and he can say it. And if he says something that's untrue, they can sue the hell out of him, but it's not a criminal offense. I think though that when you come in here, I'll tell you where the dirtiest part of the whole thing rubs with me is this: you're going to pay us a retainer of $20 million to do an internal audit. You know, that's almost money laundering, right?
Yeah. Because
you're asking them to, and that's exactly what Michael Cohen did. That's what they did with the Michael Cohen payments. That's money laundering. Look, guys, if you pay money to your attorney and couch it as a retainer for him to do something that's illegal, then you're laundering funds. You're taking ill-gotten gain and you're laundering it to make it look like that it was legitimately earned, right?
Right.
I mean, I'm not saying that that's implicatable to the president. I don't know whether it is or isn't. I don't know that was even part of the Mueller investigation. I think the Southern District of New York is investigating that right now. But now, if you carry something on your books as being a legitimately earned payment, and it was to pay off a porn star, you know, so you could still win an election, that is money laundering. That's an offense, you know. So, and it would be here. I mean, if you're trying to get the Nike Corporation to tell you to pay you a retainer for legal services you're not really rendering, you know, but it's really a hush money payment to keep you from blowing the cap off their blowing their market cap just right before their quarterly earnings statement. And I'm using terms now that they sound good, but I don't know what they mean. You know. But I mean, if that's what you're doing, then that's, you know, that's I see that that's illegal. But what are your thoughts on it, Charles? I mean, it's just amazing to me that so close on the heels of the president's exoneration, the federal government goes in and busts Michael Avenatti of all attorneys.
Yes. I think it is in this world when we're trying to weave through it. You look at those situations, and like you said, I mean, the accusations against Avenatti and what he did have yet to be proven. And I think that the way he went about things probably was ill-advised and unwise if he did those things, if those are true. And I think that, but I think this is a swing prosecution, if you can call it that, next in line, right?
Well, I'll tell you this, Charles, and I'm going to be perfectly candid. I have a hard time, you know, with what the news story is being reported, I have a hard time believing that two attorneys that have appeared as bright and capable as Garagos and Avenatti are dumb enough to perpetrate such an act. To be honest, I mean, I was always mindful of the fact that because I rubbed the government the wrong way in the way in which I practiced law and always carried the fight to the government, that I had to be kind of circumspect about what I did, you know. And if I knew that something was illegal, and I would know that this was illegal, I was very reticent to do it.
Yeah,
because I didn't believe I'd get away with it. See, I mean, there's two kinds of people in the world. I heard a judge tell a client of mine one time, them that get away with it and them that don't. And I'm one of the latter. I'm not one of the former. I just don't get away with things. And so I have a hard time believing, you know, they're either these super geniuses that have won all these cases, and they're clearly, Garagos has won a lot of cases. I don't know what Avenatti's won or hadn't won. He's certainly been portrayed in his many national television appearances. And I'm someone, Charles, you may not know, but I made plenty of national television appearances as a talking head on television. I even worked for Nancy Grace as a on-air correspondent from time to time, piecemeal, you know. No, I didn't get any payment for this, but I got to say that I was an on-air contributor to the Nancy Grace show, whatever that's worth.
You're famous.
Even after getting convicted, I still went on the Nancy Grace show a few times. It probably ran her right off the air. It's probably why she's not on anymore. But you know, I have a hard time believing that these guys would do something that is so easy to catch.
Yes.
You know,